Okay, guys, good afternoon. Welcome back. Hope you all are doing well. It's Wednesday, February 24th, and right now it's about 12:54, so we do have 6 minutes, and then we'll get today's lecture started. And having a good week to this point. So I'll be right with you guys with our content for the day in just a few. Just kind of get comfortable, ready to learn. Good afternoon. Welcome, welcome. Hey, Danny. Hi, Chelsea. Good to see you guys. Just kind of getting my setup here, my phone and stuff. Hey, Margarita. Good to see you.
In some states, of course, well, in our state, I think most of the other driving season, can't vote, there's no hearing,
Hey, Danny. Good to see you too. Hey, Diego. Good to see you too. Nick, welcome back. Hey, Brenda. Good to see you. Welcome back, everybody. Stipulative theoretical operational. Okay, cool. All right. Nice. Hey there, Stacy, Noah, and all the rest. Thanks for being here. Hey, Vanessa, Allison, I see you there. Welcome again. Hey, John. How's it going? Hey, Yvonne. Hello, hi Nancy, good to see you there. Got a couple more minutes, then we'll get things rolling. I guess, wow, yeah, so you guys have heard about Tiger Woods, right? I guess that was like the big news yesterday since the last time we all met. Too bad. Anybody don't know what I'm talking about? Maybe somebody didn't get to check their news feed or something. Hey, Blake. Hi, Edward. Hello, Jennifer and Micah. Hey, Charisse. Okay, Jasmine, let's see your question. I see it on my phone first, so I'm kind of waiting for it to pop up here. Okay, you have a question. Register for the 2:30 to 3:45 class, but the 1 p.m. lecture fits to your schedule better at times. Oh, well, Jasmine, it's a totally different class, though. You mean 2:30 to 3:45 Introduction to Philosophy? This is a different course, though. This is Introduction to Critical Thinking. So the material is way different, totally different book, totally different assignments and everything else. So that wouldn't work, actually. but you're welcome to hang out and learn a little bit of extra stuff about logic and argument if you want, but no, it wouldn't be a substitute, no. Yes, we are going to continue going on the same notes that we were building up on Monday, everybody. So that's true, Noah. Hi, everyone else that's just arriving. Dylan, Nayeli, Sophia, Ashley, Emily, Alexa, Diane. Okay, yeah, no, not to worry. Sorry about that. I know that sometimes the schedule is not ideal, but you can't always watch these lectures at a different time in the playback. I think it's nice to watch it live, though. You get the most out of it. But just do your best managing your schedule, and I'm sure you'll be okay. You've been participating pretty well throughout the semester so far. So not to worry too much, but yeah, sorry for that little complication, but no big deal. You'll be good. Cool. Sounds good. And welcome back, Kenya. Okay, guys, so now we're at pretty much 1 p.m. Therefore, I'm going to get the meeting underway for all of us. Good to see you guys. I see everybody here in the chat. And, per our typical custom, make sure that you get a chance to type in a comment at some point. That'll just be my way of noting your attendance here today. So let's resume. We are now in the part of the class where we're talking about the material in chapter 3 of our textbook. And we got through a lot of it on Monday, so we just have to finish off those notes today, and then that's our mission for this meeting. So chapter 3, language and communication. Language and communication, chapter 3 of the book. So, as you can tell by the header here, that's our topic for this week. We're looking at the importance and the value of being a good, effective communicator as a good critical thinker. And we're also just kind of exploring some of the basic concepts. What is language? What are different types of functions of language? What are different types of meanings and definitions? So we began with just a brief definition of what language is in the first place. Maybe that could be a place for us to kind of get back into the topic. So who could tell me in these notes that that you know what language is? What's language overall? To put a fine point on it, what is it exactly? I mean, I'm using it right now, and when you type something back, you're using it too. But what is it that we're doing when we're using language? It's a system, but of what kind, and what does it involve? Let's see. Okay, great. Thank you, guys. So Dylan, you say it's a system of communication that involves symbols, which could be spoken, written, or nonverbal. Exactly. Same to you, Chelsea. That's right. So language is a highly complex form of symbolic communication involving signs. And the signs can involve sounds, like auditory signals, like these signals being delivered to you with my voice. They can, of course, also involve visual symbols, inscriptions that you would either write on a page or type in the screen. And then you have nonverbal signs that can also be the symbols used in language, like, for example, American Sign Language, or even just body language and tone. Human language is social. We're born into the language of our native tongue. It transmits knowledge, information, customs, traditions, culture from one generation to the next. It's kind of what separates us from lower animals and makes us this more intelligent life form that we are. We talked after that about what are some different functions of language. So, like, what are things that language can be used to do or to accomplish in the world? A basic and primary function of language is the informative function, which is simply to issue statements, to make statements that are either true or false. In the best case scenario, you provide true information, but sometimes when you have the facts wrong, you might misinform others, or even worse, in some cases, you might deceive others by intending to give them false information. But we deal with information as people. When we make claims, just any kind of statement at all, the earth is round, the moon orbits the earth, the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776. These are just all assertions of fact, and they carry truth, but false information is also within the realm of the informative function, like saying that the earth's flat or that the moon doesn't exist or something random like that. False claims. Directive function of language is when you use imperatives to try and influence or direct people's behavior or actions. So like giving commands, essentially. Once again, while we talked about imperatives earlier, it comes back into play in the third chapter here about language. So if I tell a person, you know, get out of your car, hold the door, wait for me, get out of here, these are all directive uses of language. Expressive language communicates feelings, emotions, attitudes, and it's used to bring about an emotional impact in the audience that hears it. So that's stuff like song lyrics, poems, where the main point of that linguistic item is to convey a type of mood or feeling, not necessarily to provide factual information, nor to direct a person's action. And then we've got ceremonial language, which is language used in official or formal settings. Think of wedding ceremonies, court proceedings, Miranda rights, and other official settings of that kind. So finally, and I would mention this too, I don't think I talked about this last time, but language can sometimes achieve more than one of these functions at a time. Like suppose that you tell somebody, meet me at Cal State Fullerton, or meet me in Fullerton on the corner of Nutwood and Placentia Avenue. So in that case, I'm giving a direction, but I'm also saying the information as to where it's located. So I don't know, meet me at Fullerton, which is located at this place. That would be both giving the information of where it is and giving you a directive as to what to do. So obviously we can sort of mix, mingle, and combine the different functions of language in some cases. I talked to you guys after that about the significance and the importance of nonverbal language and communication. For example, body language, sometimes gestures can help to emphasize or give greater force to the words that you're using. There's also tone of voice and how you say things, whether it's angry, bored, withdrawn. You know, the tone that you say something in can be almost as important as the message you're delivering with the tone itself. So we got to be mindful of that. And we also talked about how sometimes body language can give away telltale signs of being deceptive or anxious. So you kind of sometimes have to monitor your body language to know what messages you're giving off there. And I talked to you about how images, pictures, photos, videos can also be an effective supplement to your verbal or written communication. A picture can tell 1,000 words. Sometimes a meme can get a point across more effectively than a written essay on the same topic. So we, I think, in this young current generation are pretty skilled in the way of using images to get points across. And so we should keep that with us as we go through our lives. Afterwards, we talked about different types of meanings. So just as I usually do, guys, as I hope you're understanding, this is a review of the previous meeting and the topics we covered, and we're about to branch off into some new stuff on the same, but I want to make sure it's clear. So we talked about different types of meaning, denotative meaning and connotative meaning. Denotative meaning is like the official dictionary definition of a word with no kind of slang or spin on it that changes its like literal meaning. So the word dog refers to a specific type of mammal species. But the connotative meaning of a term is often not its literal meaning or its primary meaning, but is instead a meaning that has to do with past experience and associations. And we say that this type of meaning can be positive or negative in connotation. So the same word dog could be used as a, I guess, an insult. This person looks like a dog. Now you're trading on the association of dog as being, I don't know, non-humanoid in its physical appearance. Or you might use it as a term of companionship, like, hey, I'm chilling with my dogs or whatever, meaning in that case that you're hanging out with loyal friends. And in that case, the past experience and associations of dogs as these loyal companion animals is what's giving the positive connotation to that use of the word. Okay, then we talked about different types of definitions, and that's where we ran out of time on Monday. So we mentioned, I believe, stipulative definitions, which are definitions that are given to new words that emerge within the language. Because, you know, language is not stable. Certain words that were common in everyday speech hundreds of years ago in the same English language are no longer so normal. And of course, many words that we use today didn't even exist in previous times because they speak to ideas, concepts, technologies that didn't exist back then. So stipulative definition, gigabyte, decaf, sexual harassment or whatever. These are all words that didn't really have any clear understood meaning before recent events in the world, either social or technological. So that's stipulative definitions, meanings of new words. Then there are theoretical definitions. Those are definitions of scientific terms, so that's a pretty basic idea. When you're looking up the meaning of what is mass, force, acceleration, or whatever, you're looking at a term that's given by a theoretical definition in science, another type of definition. And then finally, we ended with the operational definitions. Those are just definitions that involve the use of a boundary or a threshold in order to create standardization in the use of words. So like I gave this example, which is also mentioned in the book, to be defined, legally anyway, as driving under the influence, you have to have a threshold of blood alcohol content that is greater than or equal to 0.08. Now, that's a uniform standard, at least in our state law. Do some people feel sober at 0.10? Sure. Do some people feel too drunk at 0.05? Also true. But we can't have the standard differ from person to person because we have to have standardization and a universal application of the word. So we impose this boundary, and that's how that is operationally defined. Same with, like, I don't know, other concepts. Legal adulthood, operationally defined as meeting the year of 18 or older. This line in the sand above which a person is deemed an adult is defined operationally, because once again, some people may feel more or less mature at the age of 18, but we have to have a uniform standard so that operational definition is put in place. Okay, and we talked about other things too, like maybe tax brackets or the definition of obesity medically, which has to do with a BMI number threshold. Okay, so we're going on from there as we continue through chapter 3. The next and last type of definition, I think I told you guys last time that we were going to study or mention 4. So there was stipulative, theoretical, operational, and now one more, persuasive definitions. So a persuasive definition is a definition that is used to influence other people to accept one's point of view on something. Okay, so persuasive definition. With these, you kind of have to be a little bit careful because oftentimes the persuasive definition is an attempt to get you to manipulate your opinion, to get you to agree with somebody without making a rational argument. So they're often skewed definitions, biased definitions that reflect the judgment or the standpoint of the person who states this definition. Let me give you an example which I think will make it easier to comprehend. So suppose that there's some person there, and what they tell you, you ask them, what's taxation? Maybe you just didn't know or someone didn't know. So they say, hey, I've heard the word taxation, but I'm a little vague on what it means. What is that? And the person says, oh, I'll tell you exactly what it means. I've got strong views on this. Taxation it's basically theft. It's theft. It's taking money from your paycheck that you worked hard for and spending it on things you might not agree with. So what's tax? Taxation is theft, my friend. Now that would be a persuasive definition. What's this person trying to persuade you about this concept of tax if they define it as theft? I mean, it's easy enough, but let me hear in the chat from you just to make sure it's all clear. If a person were to define taxation as theft from the individual, then they must be trying to get you to think what about taxation? That it's bad, that it's unjustified. So like a hardcore libertarian type of person who doesn't even believe in the social system or government might have that view. They may say taxation is theft and that's what I think. On the other hand, a person could have an opposite type of definition coming from a different political perspective. Suppose that you ask them what's private property, and they tell you, oh, private property is theft. People think they're just accumulating wealth for themselves. Actually, they're stealing it from less fortunate people and exploiting them and their resources. So I say private property is theft. Now, this would be like a classic, like a Marxist kind of, viewpoint from the opposite political ideological extreme. And if that person defines property as theft, then they, have negative views about that and they want you to agree with them. And so sometimes when we hear definitions from people, they're not defining something in its ordinary denotative sense, right? Taxation, just in the denotative sense of the word, is the appropriation of revenue from citizens in order to fund public programs. That could be good, that could be bad, but you shouldn't put your thumb on the scale when you define something, trying to tell a person how to feel about it, right? Like a person might say, what is meat? Meat is murder. Well, that person has a kind of like a very strong, anti, or I should say pro-animal ethical perspective, which they're trying to impress upon you in the way they define the term meat. So whether you agree or disagree with any of these claimed definitions, the best way to give a definition to an audience that doesn't really know the meaning of the word is just to define it neutrally and allow people to form their own opinions on it. If someone says, oh, what is abortion? It's the no good, awful, terrible, disgusting act of murdering a child or whatever. That definitely places a heavy bias against the practice. If you want to let a person determine on their own what they think, then you could just give a definition that's more straightforward, like it is the intentional termination of pregnancy, which is basically what it is. So when we encounter these persuasive definitions, you should have a little bit of skepticism about them, because sometimes they're trying to distract you from getting to the truth on your own. And let me just see if there's more in the book. They oftentimes use emotional language. They'll, if you hear that in a definition of a word, someone's giving praise to it or condemning it, then that's a good giveaway that this is a persuasive definition. So the no good, awful, or the awesome, amazing, blah, 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 is usually not going to be a neutral definition. Here's what that's going to be about in the book really fast. So just pulling that up. Okay, persuasive definitions are used as a means to persuade or influence others to accept our point of view. The definition of taxation as a form of theft, or genetic engineering as playing God, that would be a person that's opposed to genetic manipulation of any material, are both examples of persuasive definitions. They often use emotional language, such as the negative term theft in the first definition. There's nothing inherently wrong with using persuasive or emotional language. For example, in poetry and fiction, it's clearly appropriate. However, if your main goal is to convey information, then it's best to avoid that. Persuasive definitions, because their primary intention is to influence the attitude of the audience rather than convey information, can be a problem in critical thinking when they distract us from getting to the truth. Okay, so there you go, one more type of definition, and then we can move on. The next part of chapter 3 discusses what are qualities of a good definition. What are the criteria or the qualities that have to be there for a definition to be a good one? Because basically not all definitions are equal. Some are more accurate and suitable to the concept that is being defined than others. So let's consider what are 5 criteria of a good definition. Okay, so first of all, a good definition should be neither too broad nor too narrow. Okay, so to explain this, a good definition is stated in such a way that it denotes all and only the things that the term refers to. A definition is too broad if the way that it is stated includes more things than the term really does refer to. And a definition is too narrow if the way that the definition is stated would only include fewer things than what the term really refers to. So like, for example, sometimes you're the student that is asked to give a definition, like in a school assignment or on a test. Professor asks you, tell me what this word means. And now you're the definer who tries to give this good definition. Well, if you're going to give a good one, you want to make sure it's neither too broad nor too narrow. So let me give you examples of how a definition could fail either of those criteria, or in either of the ways of this one criteria. So like, suppose that I tell you that a square is a polygon. Is this definition too broad or is it too narrow? Because, you ask me what's a square. Oh, okay, square is a polygon. That's my definition for you. Too broad, too narrow, or is it just right? Let me know. Think about what you're saying, Margarito. Consider, because if it was too narrow, then it would specify a subclass of squares. It's too broad. Danny, also kind of, yeah. Okay, it's too broad. Let's be specific as to why. Because the word polygon just means multi-sided geometric figure. And yes, a square is a polygon, but there are many other polygons also. So if you just said multi-sided object, that would not narrow it down just to squares. That would include triangles, rectangles, octagons, dodecahedrons, pentagons, and every other possible multi-sided object in geometry. So it's too broad because it doesn't specify which of the polygons the square actually is. Okay? What about this? You ask me what's a dog, and I tell you it's basically like a chihuahua. Now, tell me, is that too broad or is that too narrow? Definition of dog, like a chihuahua, Is this good definition? It kind of fails, but why does it fail? Maybe you'll tell me yes, because in this case it's too narrow. That's one species, or I should say one breed within the species of dogs, but it doesn't summarize what dogs in general are. Yvonne, no. Chihuahuas are not all dogs. Some dogs are chihuahuas, but not all of them. So if you say dog definition chihuahua, you're not giving a broad enough definition. So you'd have to go into like the genetic and physiological characteristics that define dogs in a more general sense. Okay, so yeah, good, Brenda. What about, I tell you that a car is a method of transportation. Too broad or too narrow? Someone asked me, what's a car? I say, you use it for transportation. That's the definition. What do you think, guys? Just trying to make sure this is sinking in. So we're just going for a few examples first before moving on. The car is the current example, defined as a mode of transport. It is too broad, yeah, because there's many other modes of transportation, not merely cars. And so saying it this way doesn't narrow it down to just that kind of form of transportation. So what's a good definition then? It's neither too broad nor too narrow. It just captures the things that the word refers to, not more nor less than those things. So to define car, the right definition would have to be something like a passenger vehicle that's used for transportation on the roadways, and it has either an internal combustion engine, a hybrid, or an electric engine. Maybe that's the best definition I can give. I think that gives a sense of what cars truly are, but maybe, that actually leaves the possibility of motorcycles. So I might have to say like a passenger vehicle with certain dimensions and features that eliminate the case of like mopeds, bikes, whatever. If I said something on wheels, that would be too broad. If I said anything that's made by Ford Motor Company, that would be too narrow because that's only some of the cars and there are many other auto manufacturers. So a lot of you guys probably in childhood or later might have heard the old children's story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. I don't really remember all the details of it, but I just remember one thing, that there was a part where it's like she's trying to find out which porridge to eat or something, and there was one that was too hot and one that was too cold and then one that was just right. So with a good definition, it shouldn't be too broad and include way more stuff than the word really means, nor should it be too narrow and only refer to a subset of the things that the word really does indicate, but just right. So it includes under its scope all and only the things that the term itself refers to. Okay, so that's a good definition, one quality. Another criteria below is that a good definition will state all the essential attributes of the thing and leave none of them out. States all essential attributes. So a definition is incomplete if it does not mention some of the core defining features of the thing that the definition refers to. So we mentioned the square just a minute ago. Let's go back to that case of the square if you can. Who can give me the proper definition of a square? The definition that's not too broad, not too narrow, and does state all the essential attributes. So what are the defining features of a square? Talking geometry talk for just a minute. What does it take to be a square? You'll let me know. Okay, so Jay, you say a shape with 4 right angles, and that's good, but you're missing something because that also would include rectangles, huh? And rectangles also have 4 right angles. So we need a little more information. A geometric shape that has 4 equal sides that connect. Okay, Margarito, but there's like a diamond or a rhombus shape that you could draw, which could have those features. Like, say, here's a rhombus. And in this case, you do have 4 equal sides, or like a diamond shape can have 4 equal sides. So, all right, Brenda, we're getting there. 4 equal sides and 4 equal angles. Correct. The angles specifically have to be right angles. So, Margarito, a geometric shape that has 4 equal sides that connect in a 90-degree angle. Well, it's plural, I guess, because there's 4 90-degree angles, right, in the square. You got them at each corner. So anyway, this is not a perfect drawing of a square because the sides I have here are not exactly equal in distance, but a perfect square defined as such is a 4-sided polygon where the interior angles are all right angles and all the sides are equal in length. That's a perfect definition of a square. It leaves nothing out. If you just said it's a 4-sided object, you'd be leaving out some information that would make the definition too broad. If you just say that it's a 4-sided object where the sides are of equal length, you're still not making mention of the necessary angles within each of the vertices of the square. So good. And sometimes in life, you're defining things and you neglect to mention core features of whatever it is. So a good definition reveals to the person that wants to understand the word's meaning all the necessary content that has to do with that thing. Okay, very good. So the next important feature or quality of a good definition is that it should not be circular. Okay, so what is a circular definition? A circular definition is a bad definition because when you have a circular definition, it includes the word itself in the definition of the word. How frustrating would that be? You're looking up the word square in the dictionary, and it just says anything that's a square. Be like, come on. I mean, I want to know what it means in other words. If I already knew what it meant, then I wouldn't have to look up the definition. So clear enough, right? You can't use the word in its own definition. If I'm asking you what's a car and you say anything, like a car, then you haven't given me a definition. We call that a circular definition because the definition refers back to the word itself, and it goes in a circle, therefore. So you always have to define something in other terms. That, I hope, is abundantly clear. You know what, though? Like, it's funny, as a professor, you sometimes see a student, if they're stumped on a question on a quiz, like I could ask the student, what is an operational definition? And if they forgot or if they can't find the information in time, sometimes the student, in a desperate attempt to get some credit, will just write the word again. Operational definition. That's not the right way to answer the question. You have to give a substantial answer. Otherwise, people could always just repeat the word and think that they're giving a sense of what it means. Okay, so yeah, no mention of the word itself in the definition. It has to be defined by means of other words that exist. Okay, so then, like, what's a teacher? Somebody who teaches. That would be a circular definition, because if you already know what it is to teach, then you would understand the meaning of the word teacher. So you have to refer to other words when you define something. Okay, then, a good definition, another quality among the 5 listed here, is that it should avoid overly technical and obscure language. So sometimes you have definitions of words that are not actually incorrect, but they're too complicated for the average person to understand them unless they're a specialist. So sometimes when you're an expert in something and you're talking to other experts, there's like a lot of jargon that might only really be understood by fellow specialists. Now suppose that you're trying to give a definition of one of those complicated concepts to a total novice that doesn't know about these things. Wouldn't it be a waste of time if you gave them a definition that was so complex and technical that it went right over their head and they still don't know what the thing means? Like, sometimes medical definitions could be like that. You ask your doctor, what is cystic fibrosis? I see that maybe you think that could be my diagnosis. And they say, oh, well, and then they give you a definition full of other complicated words that you have no idea what they mean. Maybe that's not the best example, but here's one from the book to give you the same kind of idea. Okay, so some people work in the field of netting and nets, net construction and the building of nets. If you're a net specialist or a net expert, and you are asked this question, tell me, what exactly is a net by definition? Imagine getting this answer coming back at you. The net guy is like, oh, you want to know what's a net? I love this question. I'll tell you exactly. So basically a net is anything that's reticulated or decussated at equal distances with interstices between each intersection. So there you go, that's a net. Now, if you're like me, you've heard this definition, but you're still scratching your head like, well, what are the words that you've defined it with mean? Like, what is it to be reticulated, decussated, or what is an interstice? So the basic idea here is that when you give a definition, you got to make sure you pitch it at the level of understanding of your audience. Otherwise, what's the point? You give them a definition and they still don't understand it, and it will go over their head. So sometimes you have to make sure that the level of complexity of what you're explaining reaches the level of understanding of the people that you're talking to. Me as a professor, I mean, it's a big part of my job, right? I sometimes have to define and explain complicated concepts in philosophy, logic, etc., to people that are just learning it for the first time. And so I kind of have to be able to imagine, what do you already understand and know? And how can I build a bridge from that already established understanding to something new? But if you just blow someone out of the water with a hardcore, complicated technical definition, then that's kind of a waste of time, and it's not very effective at bringing their understanding up. So one more important point, try to give a definition that's understandable to the audience. If you're talking to a fellow specialist on the topic, then they probably already know the definition anyway, so you have to keep that in mind. Okay, and then one more criteria, because we say there's 5. The last one is pretty easy to mention, and it's just avoids emotional language. So usually when you have a definition, emotions play no role. You just ask what the word means. Emotional language is a telltale sign that this is actually one of those persuasive definitions that we talked about earlier, and those are usually not very good. Like I say, if somebody asks you what is abortion, you say, oh, it's the monstrous, hideous act of whatever, killing a child or something in the womb. You're lacing this definition with a lot of very pointed emotional terms. And that means that you might be getting in the way of a more neutral or basic understanding of the concept. So when you define a term, you don't need to tell people how to feel about the thing being defined, whether it's good, bad, awesome, terrible, or whatever. You can leave those emotional aspects aside, and then the definition will be clearer and more easy for people to comprehend. Yes, Dylan, Peachy's here. She's always right here. You guys don't know this, right? Because you're looking at me on the camera. But at any given point, she's right here just below my computer, like watching me give a whole lecture. I mean, you gotta see this, right? She sits right there, and like she's literally, you see that classical guitar book? My computer laptop sits perched on that, and she sits underneath it and sometimes jumps up on the table, so she's never far. Okay, so anyways, 5 criteria of a good definition. Keep those in mind as you go out into the world, informing people of stuff and trying to be accurate and clear. Okay, so we can clear that off the board now. All right then. Yeah, she's a good girl. So then, I want to mention this just in passing because it's kind of briefly discussed in the book. Sometimes a disagreement that you think you're having with another person is merely based on language, and it's not actually a real disagreement about the facts. In some certain cases, 2 people are understanding a word differently or a phrase differently, and that's what appears to produce the disagreement. And if they could just get on the same page with the way they think this word is defined, then the disagreement, so-called, would actually disappear. Like, this is an example given in the book, so let me try to work with it. So some people have the stereotypical idea that philosophers endlessly contemplate questions like this. If a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound? Wow. Does it or not? Okay. To be honest with you, this is not really the highest level of philosophical analysis or writing. It's a bit of a, out of context stereotype. But anyway, let's imagine that's a topic of debate between 2 people. Does it make a sound or no? If nobody's there and a tree falls, okay? So say that person A is like, yeah, it makes a sound. and person B says, no way, I disagree with you. It does not. Now, it could be that these people look like they're disagreeing about the question, does it or not? But maybe it's just because they don't understand or they don't have the same definition of what word. Let me ask you what you think I'm hinting at here. If a pair of people can appear to disagree about whether a tree falling in the forest makes a sound when no one's there, one says yes, one says no. It looks like a disagreement, but maybe it's just because they don't have the same mental concept of what word in that little debated question. They may be thinking of the meaning of what word differently. So help me with that, and then we can go from there. Question on the table is, why, perhaps, in terms of definitions of words, would these two people disagree on the topic of whether a tree falling in the forest makes a sound? If they disagree about that, it may just be because they're thinking of what word in different ways. Yeah, right, Noah, sound. Okay, good. So let's go into that now with a little bit more further detail. To the person that says that it makes a sound, even if nobody is there, they must think that what is the definition of sound? Follow up now. Suppose that a person hears this question, if a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound? And they're like, yeah. That person defines sound as what thing? When they say yes. They must therefore think that sound is equivalent to what? To give a yes answer to that deep, vexing philosophical question, they must be thinking of sound as what definition? Okay, Alyssa, you say noise. I kind of understand what you mean. Let me kind of maybe elaborate on that. To anybody else, you have a similar comment? Danny, they think the sound is practically noise. Your guys' attachment to the word noise is interesting. But okay, Danny, and then I think you're comparing it with the other way of looking at it. Okay, so let me give you this. If you think that the tree falling in the forest does make a sound when nobody's there, then in your definition of sound, you think sound is just the physical emission of the sound waves into the environment, whether there's any ear to perceive these sound waves or not. You know, like just the actual vibrations of the sound waves have been put into the world. And so if you think that sound has to do just with the sound waves existing, then it doesn't take a person being there for that to exist. On the other hand, consider the other person's point of view who says, no, it does not make a sound. That person must think that sound is defined as, well, Danny, I guess you've already picked up on this, that person thinks sound does mean the receiving of the sound waves by the auditory system of your ear. And so if that's the case, sound has to be experienced to exist. To the other person, sound merely has to be emitted into some physical space to exist. Okay, so in a way, these two people are not really disagreeing because they're actually not on the same page about what the word sound means. If they agreed on what the word sound means, then they would be able to have this kind of agreement. So sometimes when we disagree with people, it's not a real disagreement. It's just because some of the terms included in the so-called disagreement are understood differently by two people. Like what if somebody says, if America is attacked, we should use the military to respond. And one person says yes, and the other person says, I don't agree. Well, it could be that they don't understand the meaning of the word attack in the same way. Maybe the person who says we should militaristically respond to an attack is thinking of attack as like a conventional military assault against our nation. And the other person maybe thinks of attack in a more broad sense, like it could be cyber attacks, it could be disinformation, and you might think that those things by themselves don't require a military reaction. But the two people only appear to disagree because they're not on the same page with the meaning of the word attack. That's part of the disputed question. So sometimes you want to clarify terms with people when it appears that you have a disagreement and see if you can have a better meeting of the minds. If someone says to you, I don't think so, first of all, it's okay, even if you do have a common understanding and they just have a difference of opinion. But sometimes you'll find that the so-called disagreement really has to do with a linguistic difference of understanding, and that's something to know. Okay, so from here, the next thing I want to talk to you guys about from the last parts of Chapter 3 are what are some different communication styles? What are different ways that people tend to communicate? You're going to know, and you already, I guess, have experience in life with this. Some people communicate differently than other people do. Some people are more expressive and vocal. Some people are a little more withdrawn and shy. And then there's everything in between. But in the book, they have, I think, a helpful breakdown of 4 basic styles of communication. So knowing about this will help you to adjust and adapt to the person's style and to your own. So 4 styles of communication. Okay, it's important to be a good communicator, but that also involves being a perceptive observer of how other people communicate, whether that's professional, personal, in a relationship with your parents or your friends. You want to be able to have the most productive communication exchange with people. So this helps with that. 4 styles. First of all, we have got aggressive. And the opposite of this, passive. Then you have assertive. And finally, passive aggressive. Okay, so let's start at the top with the aggressive style of communication. Aggressive communicators are basically all about one thing, which is getting their way at all costs, at any cost. Even if that ends up offending people, undermining the relationship with the person, damaging friendships with others. The aggressive person, communication-wise, doesn't seem to care as much about that. They want to get their way no matter what, even if it means being loud, insensitive, in your face, and all of that. Pushy, right? So aggressive communicator, let me give you this definition. It's the person is concerned with getting their way at all costs, even if this causes harm to relationships. One wants to get their way. My way or the highway kind of thing. One wants to get their way at all costs. And then last part, even if this damages relationships with people. So that's the aggressive communication style. We'll go over examples of these things in a moment, but just keep that in mind. Now let's switch over to the next definition below, passive communication. So that's the total opposite extreme from aggressive. The passive communicator is the person who wants to avoid conflict and confrontation at all costs. Yvonne, you're asking about what page in the book this is from? Okay, let me just pull out my 5th edition. Sorry to say, I haven't put in binding yet, so it's still loose. But I'm going to do that soon. Anyway. Right here. Okay. Yeah, so individual styles of communication. You're going to see it on page 85 and 85, 86, and 87. Yeah, so that's where it's at, 85 through 87. Thank you. But yeah, like I was saying, you guys, the passive style of communication, what is that? That is when you want to avoid confrontation and conflict at all costs. This is the classic, you could say, pushover type. The type of person who is so reluctant to express themselves and to say what they want or need that people basically can exploit them, walk all over them, push them around, because they would rather just give up and concede the point, whatever it is, than to assertively say what they want or need and to be just open about it. So that's passive communication. One wants to avoid confrontation at all costs, and they back down easily. So that's the passive style. The person's really reluctant to ever involve themselves in a conflict or confrontation, and so much so that they really don't assert themselves and stand up for themselves, so they back down pretty easily. Okay, oh yeah, not to worry, Yvonne. Thank you very much for the question. Let's go next to the assertive communication style. In my opinion, and I think this is just a reasonable point of view, the assertive style is a good default mode to go to if you're just kind of unsure, how should I act or how should I communicate in a given situation? If you're not exactly sure, I feel like this is a good neutral middle ground that's not too extreme on either end. But what is it? So the assertive communicator is the kind of person who can tell you what they want or need calmly, confidently, without aggression or without being harsh, but at the same time they're direct, straightforward, and willing to tell you what they want or need. But at the same time, they know how to back down and hold back if it looks like they're going too far and maybe going to hurt the person's feelings or damage the relationship. So assertive communication. I'm going to create space for this above, but I want to have a little more room so I can write the full definition for now. So assertive basically is this. One states what they want or need calmly and with confidence. But knows when to hold back. They know when to draw some limits because they do care about relationships. Okay. To avoid harming their relationships with people. I really did need the space, huh? The word at the end is relationships. Okay. Sorry, it's a little small, but you can read it if you just listen to me say it. Assertive communication style. One states what they want or need calmly and with confidence, but at the same time, they do know when to hold back a little so that they don't overwhelm the person, come at them too harshly, and damage the relationship. Okay, so that's, like, I think, a good middle ground. It's neither too in your face and intense, nor so weak and docile. You get your point across. The person knows what you want or need. You're not, just being a pushover, but at the same time, you're not just being like a bull coming at them full of rage and demanding to have your way. You respect the other person enough to care about the relationship and show them a little bit of kindness too. Finally, we get to passive aggressive. Okay. So passive aggressive is an interesting communication style because it basically blends together these two opposite extremes in a certain way. So here's what passive aggressive communication is all about. The person, so they have elements of both. On the one hand, the aggressive side, they do want to get their way. So they definitely want to get their way, but like the passive person, they're not so comfortable just coming right out and telling you just honestly what it is that they want. So the passive-aggressive communicator resorts to indirect strategies of manipulation to get their way without saying as much. Okay, so let's see. One does not express themselves openly and honestly. But uses indirect strategies of manipulation to get their way. Okay, sorry for the little bit of clutter there. But what it says is passive-aggressive. One does not express themselves openly and honestly, but uses indirect strategies of manipulation to get their way. Okay, so now, looking at these 4 different types of communication style, I want to run through like a given scenario so that you can kind of have a relatable example of how they might actually play out in reality. So let's take this as our given case. Suppose that there's like a roommate situation. Some of you guys maybe, well, I don't know, it's COVID days now. It used to be that everyone goes to dorms and stuff, right? Well, anyway, imagine a roommate situation like you either may have had or will have perhaps someday, or maybe even currently do have. Use your imagination if you haven't experienced that. But basically, you know how it can be when you live with other people. Suppose that in this group of roommates, there's one particular roommate that is not cleaning up after themselves. And that is determined as a problem to the other members of the household. Behind that person's back, they say, when is this person going to start cleaning up after themselves? We're getting tired of always, picking up after them, doing their dishes, moving their stuff off of the floors. They're basically like really sloppy and messy, and it's just not fair because we all have busy lives. So they decide that one of the roommates should go and address the situation with the person and tell them that it's not appreciated, and we would really appreciate it if you would just do your fair share of the household chores, right? So a basic situation. Let's go through the different communication styles and see how the meeting with this person might go depending on which type of communicator we send over to that person. So suppose we send the aggressive communicator to deal with our delinquent roommate that's not doing their share of the chores. How do you think the aggressive communicator would handle this? And how might it play out? Just, give me your sense of that now that we're on this topic and we have an example. So this guy's going to go and talk to the person that's not doing their chores. And he's, going to try and tell him that the house is upset. So he's aggressive, though. So what do you think that's going to be like? Well, you say, Dylan, it won't go well. Okay, that's a good short summary. Let's see what else we have. I see some more comments coming in. Yeah, so make things worse, direct and brutal with yelling. Okay, all good and fair observations or judgments. Yeah, like imagine this. The person comes out and they're like, hey, yeah, you, what the hell? And it's like already it's getting hostile. What, is there a problem? Yeah, there's definitely a problem. Okay, look, me and the other roommates, we're just tired of you, man. What's wrong with you? Are you like a pig? Are you a bum? Who raised you? Look at this. How can you live like this? There's stuff everywhere. We're always cleaning it up. The guy tries to start saying, but hold on. Oh, no, don't talk. I'm talking, okay? You need to start cleaning things up. You want to have a bigger problem with me and the other roommates? Then keep doing it, all right? You want to find out what's going to happen? This is not cool. We don't like it. We don't appreciate it. Something's wrong with you, but you need to fix it, buddy. You need to start cleaning up after yourself. I'm not going to have this conversation again. You can imagine that person coming at them, very direct, very harsh, in your face. They want to get their way at all costs. Now, what could be the end result? Well, maybe the person will back off and start doing some of the chores, but at the same time, this is not a good way to maintain a healthy relationship with that person. They might feel a little disrespected for having been dealt with so aggressively and so harshly. Like, don't my feelings matter, etc. So, there's a cost to being the aggressive communicator. If the only thing you care about is getting your way, then sometimes it can work. And I'm not saying it never has its place. Like, if you're dealing with another aggressive communicator, sometimes a clash like that is the only way that you're going to be able to break through to them. But I would also say be a little careful, because two aggressive people, it could really escalate. What, you don't like that I don't do the dishes? Whatever, you're a clean freak. Okay, yeah, well, let's go. See, that you don't want to have happen. So it's best to choose wisely and to keep yourself in check, because aggression definitely usually does result in something that you don't want, even if in the moment it might feel righteous or justified. Okay, so what about the passive communicator? We send another different roommate. Let's suppose scenario 2. We say, not the aggressive guy, he's going to go crazy. So let's send our passive friend over to talk to him about that. How do you think that one might go in the same scenario? So passive dude is like, hey, do you have a minute? Or if you don't, it's cool, but like, how do you think it's going to go from there? Let's see, what you think about the passive case? Is it going to go well, bad, something in between? I mean, you maybe are sometimes the passive person in some situations, or you've dealt with people like this. If not, so maybe you've already got some life experience that can give you a sense of this. I think it's something you can tell me. What do you think? How would that one go? Yeah, so no, you're saying the situation shuts down quickly. Okay, one way to say it. Yes, it might not go very far. Brenda, act very nicely to talk about the issue to the roommate. Well, Brenda, it seems like you're seeing no negativity in being passive. It's not, I mean, it's good to be nice, yes, but it's not so good to be passive. Vanessa, the conversation won't be taken serious by the other roommate. Yeah, that's kind of the point. Danny, roommate probably would ignore their claim and be busy with something else. Also true. Okay, so if a passive person is trying to talk to you about wanting something, first of all, they're going to be very hesitant to even bring it up because they don't like the idea of conflict and tension. Now, I know some of you guys are like, that's good, right? People shouldn't have conflict. But you know what? No, sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes you do have to bring issues up. Otherwise, solutions never get presented. So, you know, we can imagine this person going up and being like, hey, you know, the other roommates, I mean, I personally, I don't really care, but the other roommates, you know, they kind of wanted me to talk to you because, I don't know, like, maybe you're not as much doing the chores as us or whatever, and I don't know, like if you could just do some more, it would be awesome. And then the person's like, what? I thought I was doing plenty of chores. You guys got a problem? Okay, you know what? Sorry, I knew I probably shouldn't have brought it up. Never mind, it's cool. We'll figure something out. Okay, so this passive person has just been pushed to the side, ignored, because they're not assertive and they're not willing to make a point about it. So, you know, if you want to just avoid conflict and confrontation, this is one way to do it, but you're also going to lose out a lot in life. Imagine if you're at a job offer and it's time to negotiate for your starting salary. You know, if you're too passive, you're going to be unwilling to advocate for yourself, you know, so sometimes you have to be willing to speak up for yourself or for other people or for important things that you care about. Maybe the case of the roommate cleaning up, if you're that passive, you're the type of person who's like, I would rather just do their chores than have to bring this issue up. But I mean, come on, how much in life are you going to set your own interests aside for the sake of other people who are not being considerate? So, I mean, just that's a lesson that we should know. Now, the assertive type of communicator, I believe that's the kind of best mode to go with if you're just a little uncertain as to how you really ought to be acting. The assertive communicator, it's kind of like blending the best of both worlds. You're going to say directly and honestly what you want, but you're going to do it in a calm way that's not hostile. At the same time, you're not going to just let them off the hook and back down. But if it's getting to be too intense, then you're willing to take a step back so that the relationship can be preserved. So in that case, I mean, it could be something like, excuse me, hey, do you have a minute to talk? I just want to say something because me and the other roommates have been talking a little bit and we noticed that you don't seem to do as many chores as us. Now, we're all busy and I can understand sometimes you can't do them, but it's just fair, right? Because we don't want to have to necessarily clean up after you all the time. But we do. Now the person might start saying like, oh, come on, are you guys really going to say all this? It's like, yeah, well, I don't want to upset you, but I'm just trying to be fair and direct. You know, it's just going to keep being a problem if you don't start doing it. And then we're just going to have this come up again. So just take it into consideration. And if it remains a problem, then it'll probably be addressed again later. In that case, you're being honest, fair, reasonable, but you're not trying to hurt the person's feelings, bash them over the head with criticism or inflammatory rhetoric. So I think that's usually a good productive way to meet a solution. Now let's talk about the passive aggressive, finally, last. That's a little bit funny. So if you ever dealt with a passive aggressive person, this person, let's say, wants them to do their dishes and chores, but the passive side of them doesn't want to come right out and say it. But unlike the truly passive person, they're not going to let it go and they still want to get their way. So what do you think might be these indirect strategies of manipulation that could be used in such a case to get the point across without really saying it directly? What do you imagine a passive-aggressive person might do to try and get their way here without being totally direct about the thing that they want? I have some thoughts on this, but I would love to see if you have something to offer first. So take the roommate scenario. Person's not doing chores. What could or would a passive-aggressive person do if they were trying to change the situation so that they did more chores? Let's see. Okay, hint at it. Yes, that's one way to do it. You don't come right out and say it, but you just kind of speak indirectly about it. Like, wow, what do you think about like growing up? You know, a lot of us all did a lot of house chores. That was, something I bet you didn't experience much, huh? You know, so like you're kind of letting them know you're needling at them a little bit, like, but you don't come right out and say it directly. Or let's see you, Micah, you'd stop doing the chores. That's good. Then it becomes like a sort of passive-aggressive detente, right? The two sides, neither one's doing the chores. You don't want to tell them about it, so you stop doing chores too and wait until they get the picture that something's wrong. That'd be another possibility. Make the other person feel bad for not doing chores. Yeah, but the thing, Chelsea, you'd want to do that, but you wouldn't want to come out and let them know that you're exactly addressing the issue. So it could be like, take their cell phone or something and put it over behind a big pile of dishes that they've left so that they can't ignore it and they have to like reach over it to get it. Or talking loudly in the next room within their earshot, pretending like you don't know that they hear you, but saying like, man, all the chores around the house, it's terrible that some of us aren't doing them, you know, and like, you don't just say it, but passive aggressively, you're hinting at the right kind of message. Make more a mess around their area, joke about it, good. So the passive aggressive communicator, they want to get their way, but they don't want to be direct and open. So sometimes people find that annoying. You know, people think if you really want something, you should just come right out and say it. Although at the same time, I guess there are cases where a passive aggressive style can work. You know, if you're trying to not offend someone who's given to, you know, being easily hurt or upset, but you kind of want to let them know, that might work. But in general, I think it's better to just be direct and engage with the person so that they don't have to guess and interpret what you really mean. Okay? Have people make fun of them? Sure. There's all kinds of options with passive aggressive. So here, when you go out in life, you already have your own habits and your own personality, your own identity. Some of us are the more aggressive communicators. Some are more passive. The thing is that you sometimes have to be willing to mix up your style a little bit depending on the situation you're in. You know, if you're dealing with a passive person and you come at them aggressively, you're probably going to break the relationship forever. And if you're passive and you want something and you're dealing with a more aggressive or assertive person, you might have to step up your game and be a little bit more assertive to deal with that person. So it's not like we should always bring the same exact style to every situation that we are in. Sometimes a little bit more intensity is called for. Sometimes it's cool to be a little more calm, and you have to be a wise and skilled judge of the context. So knowing how the other person communicates and how you have a tendency to communicate can sometimes give you the right perspective on how you should approach the given situation, okay? So, because in life we want to get our way and we want to have things a certain way, but we also want to have relationships with other people. And so you kind of have to balance those two things together. Asking for things that you want or need from other people is important, but you also want to make sure that you don't do it in a way that ends up hurting the person, offending them, or undermining the relationship, if you care about that kind of stuff. I guess some people, they're so aggressive, they don't care about anything except getting their way. But, we're all different, I guess. Okay. So now we're done with the styles of communication. That was one last part of our notes in chapter 3, but there's one last thing after that. There's some stuff I skipped in the book that I don't think is really the best material. They talked about like cultural, racial, and gender-based differences in communication style. But I don't really subscribe too much to the essentialism there, although I guess I could just say a few words about it overall. There have been some observations that like Americans just in general have a tendency to prefer a more aggressive or assertive communication style as compared with like particular cultures in East Asia or even Europe, where there's more concern with the health of the community overall. So like classically, there's a stereotype of the American going into Europe and making like pushy demands with waiters and bartenders that are not considered polite over there. But in America, a customer is always right, and customer service is like you just expect to receive a certain level of attention and etc. But just talking as it would be considered normal and appropriate as an American in another culture sometimes is going to be viewed from their cultural perspective as offensive, aloof, insensitive, or whatever the case may be. So you sometimes have to also consider the cultural context that you are within when you go out and communicate with people. Sometimes what works in one setting is not good or appropriate in another. But that's all I really wanted to say about that. I don't necessarily believe that like women are more passive or men, those are stereotypes that maybe have some historical evidence, but each individual is a unique person, and we, I think, are free to chart our own course on that. Okay, so the last thing from chapter 3 that I definitely wanted to talk about are what are some different rhetorical devices. Rhetorical devices. Sorry, so the word rhetorical device, this refers to a use of language that tries to use psychological tactics to persuade someone to agree with you rather than using reason. So usually these are manipulative uses of language, a way of using language that's trying to influence a person's perspective or point of view without giving them a rational argument. So what are some of the rhetorical devices? One of them is euphemism. And the sort of contrary to that is dysphemism. And then beyond dysphemism, we also have sarcasm, hyperbole, and deception. So looking at the board, I basically realized that I'm probably going to have to clear space and put these terms up again. But at least for now, you can see the terms that I'm now going to mention and discuss with you. 5 rhetorical devices: euphemism, dysphemism, sarcasm, hyperbole, and deception. Okay, so with euphemism first. A euphemism is when you replace a negative or a neutral word with a more positive sounding word in order to make the thing sound better than it might really be, to sort of sugarcoat the truth. So that's the definition. Let me write it here. Why? In order to sugarcoat the truth. Okay, so euphemism. Replacing a negative or neutral word with a positive sounding one in order to sugarcoat the truth. Euphemisms, we encounter them all the time in written work, in media, in political speech, in marketing and advertising. So let me ask you guys about what might be some cases of euphemism. Suppose that you're going to sell a car, right? And so you want to put an ad out for the car to get an interested buyer. And here's the thing. The fact is, this is an old car. This car is old. So that's one thing you could say about it. You could put in the ad, old, 1973, Chevy Nova or whatever. But what sounds better than calling it old? It basically conveys the same info, but it sounds way better. What would be a euphemism for saying this is an old car? A euphemism that makes that actually sound like a really nice thing about it. We don't say it's old, we'd rather describe it or say that it's vintage, exactly. It's retro, it's classic, So now what was something that might have sounded antique, another good one, Dylan, what might have turned some people away has been flipped into something that sounds like a positive selling point. Who doesn't want a classic, retro, vintage, antique car? But if you say it's old, decrepit, ancient, used, it just doesn't sound as nice. Okay, here's another one. You're selling a house. You want maybe someone to want to buy it, right? The problem is it's very small. It's a tiny house. So you could put that in the ad. Come check out the tiny house on 2503 Matthews Avenue. But no one will want to buy it. So instead of saying it's small, but to still give a sense of its dimensions to the buyer, you might claim that the house is cozy. Yeah, cozy, quaint. It's just a cozy, quaint little shack that you're going to love. Okay, so the person gets there, they see how small it is, but they were brought in by the euphemism there. Okay, good, comfy, cozy, etc. Sometimes this happens in advertising and marketing. If they want you to buy the product, they'll describe it in a way that might appeal to your sensibilities as a buyer. It doesn't only happen in marketing and advertising, but sometimes in political or just everyday speech. Let me look in the book here for a couple more examples, maybe. A euphemism is the replacement of a negative term with a positive one to cover up or sugarcoat the truth. Sometimes they're humorous and easy to see through. They talk about how, okay, a person's dead. That definitely sounds grim and final and terrible. But no, you can say, well, the person has passed away, or they're in a better place. That sounds much more pleasant. A better place, okay, that's good. Or passing away. That doesn't mean it's over. You're just passing into the next phase of whatever. So, saying it as dead sounds much worse than that. Body bags coming from war zones overseas, labeled transfer tubes. Private soldiers working as mercenaries called security consultants. Drone operations where we've killed some civilians instead of calling them attacks, targeted killings. You're going to get fired by your job. You're going to get canned, sacked. No, let's say you've been let go. You've been let go. You're free now. Doesn't that sound nice and a little bit better than you've been fired and taken out? We're going to slash the workforce. We're going to fire like half the workforce. No, we're going to right size the workforce. We're just going to make it the right size. That sounds nice. So in all these different cases, you have to sometimes be able to see through the use of the euphemism to come to the right conclusion. Oftentimes people use language to try and shape your view of something. And look, that car that I mentioned that we could describe as old or ancient, as opposed to vintage and retro, it's the same car. It's just language that's shaping a person's perspective in a more negative or positive direction. So sometimes you have to be wise to the uses of language and how it can, of course, influence the way you think about things. So knowing that euphemisms exist, seeing that they are out there, gives you a better ability to judge things accurately on your own. Now, the opposite of the euphemism is the dysphemism. That's just below. So it's defined exactly in the contrary way. This is replacing a positive or a neutral term with a negative one to create disapproval towards it, okay? Okay, well, we'll come to these last three at the beginning on Monday, so I'm going to just erase to create a little more room. We'll remember that there's three last rhetorical devices to quickly study or talk about. But yeah, dysphemism, replacement of a positive or neutral term with a negative one in order to create disapproval. That's a dysphemism. So somebody's smoking cigarettes, but if you don't like cigarettes so much, you can say, what are you doing over there with those cancer sticks? I mean, doesn't that sound horrible? It's a stick, you're sucking on it, and you're going to get cancer from it. It does not sound at all as pleasant or enjoyable as saying, a nice cigarette or smoke. So that's one case. Let's see. There's a tax policy that exists, which is often the official name of it, its denotative term would be the estate tax. Sometimes it's referred to as the inheritance tax. So if you have a family wealth of a certain amount, then when you pass away or die, I don't know, you would leave that wealth to your offspring if you put them in your will. The thing is, if you have wealth in a certain amount, then there's a law which says that the state gets to claim a significant percentage of it when it's transferred over to your next of kin. This is called the estate tax. It's a taxation on your estate when you transfer it to the next of kin through becoming deceased. But many people, are opposed to the tax, and those that are opposed to it give it a different name. They call it the death tax, right? And that sounds very, very scary and bad. It's the death tax. Like, can't I even die without being taxed? No, you'll be taxed for dying. So that creates disapproval towards the policy, but there can be valid, legitimate reasons for very wealthy people to face a tax burden when they pass along some of that inherited wealth. So a couple of examples there. Let me see if I have more in the book from that. Yeah, sometimes people, if you want to criticize or condemn someone with a political perspective you disagree with, you can use euphemisms or dysphemisms. Take the case of pro-choice, right? Like, which means that you believe a woman should have a right to a safe and legal abortion. A person that doesn't believe in this or thinks it's wrong might not use the label pro-choice and instead say like pro-death or anti-life or something like that. And you could do it in the opposite direction. Pro-life, person that believes that abortion is immoral or kills a human being. You could say, well, these people are anti-choice. So anyway, that shapes the perspective that someone has towards either of these issues merely through the use of language and the rhetoric being used. So that's a little bit more for our notes, guys. We're pretty much done with chapter 3. We've come to the end. There's just those last 3 definitions. So we'll make sure to cover those at the beginning on Monday. Until then, just have a good weekend. Make sure to read chapter 4. And chapter 4 will be the last new chapter before we start to prepare for the midterm that comes up later. I'm going to be finished with the grading of your guys' first quiz over the weekend. I think I'll probably be done no later probably than the end of the day Saturday, but maybe sooner, possibly into Sunday, but I'll try my best to finish on time. And then I'll notify you through Titanium that you can check for your grade by emailing me for your score. I do request that students send me individual emails. That's just how I like to keep in touch with you guys and to have a connection. So once that's ready, you can send off a message to me if you like your score on the first quiz. The first homework, that's already been graded, so those are out when you're ready if you want them. Okay, guys, so let's adjourn for now. Thanks, everybody, so much. Another good meeting. Have a nice weekend, and if you need anything, feel free to email me, and I'll be checking those messages. Okay, guys, have a good one then. Bye-bye. Thank you.